It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consultant. If you reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Otherwise, if you want to get a hold of me about the show, it's Opperman Report, oppermanreport.com, or oppermanreport@gmail. But you know what? Also, too, if you want to get a hold of me, send me a message on Patreon through the Opperman Report Patreon. I see those right away. Those I get an email notification when I see that. Way better than Twitter or Facebook messaging me through those forms or Instagram. But everything you hear Monday to Friday on AM/FM radio, you can find over at the Opperman Report Patreon with all the ads and the commercials cut out. I just put up some stuff, an exclusive document. It's in the Epstein Transparency Act. My client, Tom Mayer, 10 years ago, July 4, 2016, made a report to the FBI about the Katie Johnson, his client, Katie Johnson. And so a lot of people, say, well, it's a made-up name. The guy made a report to the FBI 2016, July 4th. And I just put that up. That's exclusive. Nobody has that. Up at the Patreon. It's free. You can get that there for free. Otherwise, every Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you got 3 hours of brand new podcast content, 2 hours of podcast interviews, and then 1 hour solo, just going over what's been going on in my life that week. We have today an exciting show. We have Jenna Gonyea. Okay, you can find him on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all these different places under the name Misguided Patriots. And his website is misguidedpatriots.com. And he's got a book that just came out. Believe it or not, the name is Misguided Patriots. Okay, and the book's it's got 4.8 stars. There's only one character who gave it like 3 stars. And he didn't even leave a reason why. All the other ones are highly rated, all 5 stars, every single one. And he's a great storyteller. I've been talking to him off the air for a good 20 minutes. Mr. Jenna Gonyea, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, man, thank you so much. Before we get into the book, Misguided Patriots, tell us about yourself. Who is Jenna Gonyea?
I'm a 68-year-old Texan. I'm a former manufacturing professional. I've been retired. I had to retire early because my wife had a brain injury, and I take care of her. But my career has all been manufacturing, with everything from plastics defense stuff to oil field. And I'm really not an author or investigator. I just kind of found myself feeling compelled to write this book after I made some discoveries about my parents.
And so you wrote this book, Misguided Patriots. So then what did you discover about your parents?
Well, this goes back to like May of last year, and my daughter had been pestering me to start using AI. I had never done anything with AI, and I downloaded this AI app. She told me to, and I was just kind of like shooting the breeze with this AI. And I said to the AI that you got to excuse me. I grew up in a mental hospital where all the rooms had 5 walls, and this AI parroted back to me the name of this mental hospital that I had lived at as a child, and I was impressed by that. And I called my daughter and told her that I'd used the AI she was telling me to, and I told her about this weird conversation I had with AI. And she told me that I had never told her about living in a mental hospital, and that, she immediately began, Googling and looking up the name of it. And she quickly figured out that my mom, who was in the CIA at the time, which my daughter already knew that my mom had worked in Washington for the CIA, that my mom was working at the CIA. My father was studying psychology at the University of Maryland, and she real quick discovered that University of Maryland was tied to MK Ultra, and so was this Cherry Point VA mental hospital, and they must have been involved in MK Ultra, and she just started digging. and pulled me in.
Okay, that's a lot. Let's slow down for a second here. By the way, University of Maryland is 100% an NSA, National Security Agency facility, okay? That's where Edward Snowden was stationed. There's no doubt the computer program over there is an NSA operation. This is all documented, and you can look it up. But now, a couple of things. You mentioned that you were in a mental hospital as a child. How did you wind up there in a mental hospital?
Well, it's a good question. Oddly, my father had been in the Air Force in Baltimore, and he got out in 1954. And when he got out, he started attending the University of Maryland, studying psychology. He got 2 master's degrees and his PhD. And while he was getting his PhD, they actually had him living on the grounds of this Prairie Point VA mental hospital, doing a residency of sorts, I guess, for a psychologist. And they had staff housing this was a giant place. This is like 500 acres. It's a huge place. And they had housing there, and we lived there.
Wow. And was this common? Were other students living there as well?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to assume so, but there are a lot of things that I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
But
so when you say that
I was only there for like 6 months when I was really young, but my sister was there longer, and she has some recollections from there. I don't really recall any of it. It's more family.
Okay, but John Gonyea, when you said that you were living in a mental hospital, it wasn't because you were being treated for mental illness. It was because that's where your dad was working.
Yes.
That's an important point to make, because I said, hey, I'm talking to this guy for 20 minutes. It doesn't sound like he has any kind of mental issues. Now I find out 10 seconds into the interview, he was raised in a mental hospital. Okay, I hate to make light. Okay, but now the other thing too is you said that you found out that your mom was in CIA. How did you find out, and when did you find out?
Well, my mom had always told us that she had been in the CIA. She had told us the story where she had in the mid-1950s moved to Washington, D.C. and took this job in the CIA. And she was a secretary in the CIA. And when she met my dad in D.C., they got married. And when she got pregnant with my sister, that she quit. So we grew up knowing that she was at that point at some time connected to the CIA, but she told us it was just for those few years, and we accepted that.
Yeah, and when you grow up in D.C. or Maryland, they call it the DMV, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. Oh no, D.C., Maryland, Virginia. It's very common. You meet people at every kind of age, all over the place. You meet people work in the White House, work in the defense intelligence. You meet all kinds of folks. So it's not unusual if you grow up in that situation. So your mom was CIA, and then your dad was a psychiatrist in kind of an intelligence facility, though. Is that what you came up with?
Well, actually, my mother had told me, she told us that about herself, when she described my dad, when she met him. She said that he was in the Air Force during the Korean War, but he never went overseas to fight. He just played in the band and wrote the newspaper for the base. And once again, I just accepted that and grew up believing that. But over the last year, when my daughter started digging into this stuff, we actually got a hold of his DD-214, his discharge paper. And it clearly says on there that he was at ARDC, Air Force Research and Development Command. And it lists all his skills on there as, Tech 9, Mechanical 9, Electrical 9. I mean, he was a highest rated technical guy at ARDC, which was at that time in Baltimore, it had just started. And, it was doing covert development work of the U-2, the specs, not actually designing the plane, but specking out the U-2. And my mom, it turns out, was not just a secretary at the CIA. She was working in OPC, Office of Policy Coordination, which later became the director of the plans under Dulles, doing all the covert stuff there, which included the U2. So it didn't take us very long at all to figure out how they met.
So your dad, though, you told me he was a psychiatric student, but then he's doing specs on the U2?
That's what he was doing before. So he moved. He was actually discharged early. It says on his DD-214 that he was discharged at the convenience of the government. And he went straight from ARDC to studying psychology at the University of Maryland. Okay. Of course, tangled up with my CIA, covert side CIA mom as he's making that move.
Now, and when you told me that University of Maryland was an MK Ultra facility, I said, well, I never heard that before. What's this guy talking about? But I Googled it while you were talking. I used some little AI myself here, and you're damn right, man. I had no idea. This was a huge MK Ultra facility and well recognized here. Yeah.
It's one of the only ones that the documents didn't get shredded.
Wow. Okay, I never knew. It doesn't make me happy to hear that, but okay, that's what we're here. Okay, this is interesting. Now your parents, both of these parents must have been incredibly brilliant. If your dad's working both in psychiatry and on the U2, these must have been two really brilliant folks, right?
Yes, they were both very brilliant folks. And I think that's a key part of the CIA that I think everybody needs to kind of keep in mind. I don't think they were bumbling dupes, I think they were pretty bright guys.
And that is a shame. They do kind of suck up the best and the brightest we have in our nation. They try and suck them up into these intelligence operations.
I agree completely.
Now, what about you and your sister? Were you encouraged to go to college and become doctors, or what did your sister wind up doing, and what did you wind up doing?
Oh my goodness! Well, my sister ended up going to college out at Texas Tech and becoming she ended up marrying a Mormon missionary when she was at Texas Tech and moving to Utah and getting involved with all of his business and stuff out there. And she now runs one of the biggest flag companies in the country, makes those big flags that they unfurl at football fields.
Okay.
And makes a lot of money and lives in Hawaii.
Okay. Well, I can't argue with that, right? Okay. And you wound up in manufacturing.
Yeah, that's kind of a long, odd story, but okay. Yeah, I was kind of for some reason I was kind of discouraged by my mother from going to college.
Okay.
And she actually pressed me to drop out of high school, and I'm still trying to completely understand that because it's so odd.
And when you were in manufacturing, you weren't manufacturing like top secret satellites or missiles or anything, were you? Is that maybe that's the case?
But a lot of my sister's family is or almost all of my sister family is defense connected.
Yes.
And mine's quite the opposite, and I can't really understand why that's the case.
Interesting. Okay, so then what's the next stage of this story? Because I haven't read your book, and I barely know anything about it.
Well, there's actually a previous stage where my mother, when she goes to college, she goes to this small college, Immaculate College in Pennsylvania, and right outside of Philadelphia. And my daughter, she leaves there and she takes a job at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia for this foundation called the Cardoza Foundation. It's a blood research foundation. It still exists today. And at the time that she goes to work there in 1947, it's run by an Army colonel, a guy named Harold Jones, and it's very tied to the military. They developed all the blood storage stuff. He was a World War I guy, and he optimized blood storage for World War II. And, after the war, she goes to work there for him. What we find out later was as a CIA officer, because we found documents that show the CIA. We found in the CIA reading room, we actually found a document describing them recruiting women at that small Philadelphia Catholic girls' college my mother went to, and so it became pretty clear to us that, she went straight from college into this Cardiza Foundation as a CIA new hire in 47 when they were standing up the CIA. So she's like an original.
Yeah, what about your grandparents? And did they have an intelligence background or a military background? Government?
Not apparently. My mother's father was an executive with Pennsylvania Railroad. Okay. My father's father, I'm not so sure. He actually was a coroner during Prohibition, working up near in Clinton County, New York, which is kind of reputed to be the most corrupt county in New York. And he was an elected official coroner up there. And I don't know what his connections were, but he may well have had some.
Yeah, coroners keep secrets. Let's put it that way. So that would be a key spot.
Especially with all the booze smuggling going across there.
That too, yeah. What do you think? Okay, so then tell us, what did you find out then about your mother and your father and their work in the CIA?
Well, most of what my mom left her tapes was more breadcrumbs. She did detail specific things like that little snippet you heard about her talking about Rosner, or her talking about, the continuity government sites, particular missions they were running overseas. But in terms of, the real details, it was more connecting the dots and piecing things together. Like when she talks on her tapes, and these 8 hours of tapes, she made 8 hours of tapes for 2 years before she died, and they go chronologically through her whole life. So as she gets to the part where she's going to work for the Cardiza Foundation, she starts describing, some instances there at the Cardiza Foundation. But what's interesting is that later in life, she always told me that she knew she was going to die from leukemia because of her exposure to radioactive materials at Jefferson Hospital. And I never really connected that to the CIA because I didn't think she was working for the CIA yet. But she actually ended up losing all her teeth by the time she was 27 years old as a result of all that radiation exposure. I guess it damaged her salivary glands or something.
And how did that come about, though? Why was she exposed to radiation?
Well, she details out these tapes, bringing these people in and doing research with these children and adults both. And so I'm just putting two and two together and saying, okay, she's CIA, she's working for this general in this Blood Research Foundation, handling radioactive material and handling patients, doing research on them. They were, doing some kind of, pre-MK ultra research with radioactive material and seeing what it did to people's blood is the best I can figure.
John Gonyea, keep in mind, I haven't listened to the tapes, and neither has the audience, okay? But people can find snippets of these tapes on your TikTok, the Misguided Patriots TikTok, and also on misguidedpatriots.com. Now, did your mother have any kind of medical background that would qualify her to be at this hospital, whatever,
no.
handling patients in some kind of way? No, nothing.
No. And she described, and when she describes what she's doing with patients, it makes no sense. She's got a business administration degree from this Catholic girls' college, so it doesn't make any sense at all that she's doing that.
And she describes this on these tapes. Was she feeling remorseful for her work that she's done, or was she proud of it, or just felt nonchalant?
No, very matter of fact, nonchalant. And that's throughout all this, that's why the book is called Misguided Patriots.
Right.
By the time I finished this exercise, it was clear to me that all these people were patriots, at least in their own minds. And just, my personal opinion is that we have a hard time understanding the war mentality that they still had, having been in high school during World War II, and college during World War II, this war mentality of anything goes, I think continued throughout her whole life.
I interview so many, ex-FBI or ex-CIA. I've had so many on the show, and then sometimes you deal with them off the air and stuff too. And you're right. They you can't really blame them too much because they are patriots. They think what they're doing is right. And they're true blue. They think, that, but when you,
but they're kind of pretty much wrong in a lot of areas. So
yeah, I know. I know.
Yes.
And it must be even worse
So,
if it's your mom. You think of your mom for everything. Yeah.
yeah, it's very interesting. And we know more about my mom because, she didn't die. I mean, it's I guess, so if we follow my father goes to college at a fairly elite Union College in New York State and goes to work for ARDC. Before he goes to ARDC, he actually spends about 6 months at Cape Canaveral, and which is work, and I'm not sure exactly what he's doing. I know what they were doing in 1950 at Cape Canaveral, but I'm not sure exactly what he was doing.
What were
and
they
then
doing?
As soon as they were launching like the B-2 or whatever, those German missiles, they brought all those scientists over and they were starting missiles, and building missiles and testing them. And so he spent 6 months there once he got in the Air Force. And then from there, they created this Air Force Research and Development Command and stood it up with like under 2 dozen people in town in Baltimore in a little strip center in a little secret location. And he went to work there. And my mother, pretty much simultaneous to that, left that job with the Research Foundation and actually went to work in OPC at CIA headquarters in D.C. It was before Langley.
Earlier, you said something about how you went down to the CIA reading room and you did research there. That was just yourself, or your sister went with you? What happened? Tell us about that a bit.
No, we didn't go. I mean, it's like a place on the internet. My daughter dug around. Just, both my book and in real life, much of all this looking into these guys came from my daughter. I'm 68. She's 26. She finds stuff way faster than I do.
Yeah, I'm 63 and my daughter's 26. We both had kids late in life. That's interesting. Now, what do you call it? Which I think is the best thing because, you get over your wild ways. But now, we talked about this off the air. The book is sold as a novel, but everything you've described to me so far is your actual life.
That's true.
Gotcha.
And so in the book, when you walk through these tapes, there are lots of gaps. Like my mother describes how she arrives in D.C. in 1954, which we later find out is through another. We didn't just find these tapes. We found these tapes, and we also found a 20-page letter that she had written in 1987, so 20 years before, where she detailed the story of her life. That interestingly, she began with her arrival in D.C. and starting to work for the CIA, and they don't agree. There's conflict. Some of it is the same. Some of it's word for word the same, 20 years apart, and then other parts just don't match at all. And when I went to write the book, those facts plus the facts that there are gaps in these tapes, like she arrives in 1954 and then, or in 1951, and then she details only a few events between 51 and 55, and then she marries my dad. And it's, okay, I'm writing this book. I get these 5 years where all I can do is put together, like she has photos and talks about going to Europe, and I can look at the photos and see where they are and kind of piece things together. But I'm basically, coming up with the most likely thing that she was doing, barring a few particular things she came up with. And it wouldn't have flowed right if I made it all factual. And I wanted to have an interesting book that people would actually want to read. And so I fictionalized it, and I filled in those gaps.
Yeah, 4.8 stars. People want to read it. We can see that. But you said there's a discrepancies between this letter and what she's recorded. What do you put more faith into, the letters or the recordings?
I think that,
Oh, I lost you. No, let's try calling him back. He's in a barn, so it's kind of audio trouble there. We had a little audio issue there, and we didn't hear a bang before the call dropped, so I wasn't too worried. It was just a technical issue and not trying to silence our guest, Jenna Gonyea from Misguided Patriots. But, John, when I lost you there, we had been talking about, I was asking you, what did you put more faith into, her written statement or her audio statement? What did you think was more accurate?
Well, it just kind of depended. It wasn't just those things that we had. We actually had 4 different things. We had the written statement, we had the audio statement, we had detailed photo albums that have dates and comments next to photos, and then we also had my sister's memory and my own. And so we kind of put all those things together and tried to determine what was most plausible of these mixed up stories. And I'll have to add here that, when I first started listening to these tapes, I took time and went off to just verify. I mean, it started out as, was she ever really in the CIA? I mean, right. I need to go verify that she's just not making all this stuff up. And so I spent some time and looked up particular details that back in those days, there was no internet availability of information to be able to give these details she's given. And I figured out real quickly that she worked for the CIA and that was all legitimate. But for whatever reason, she wasn't telling the truth all the time.
I was going to ask you, you think that was intentional, or she was misleading, or was she just, you get mixed up? We're 68, I'm 63, we get mixed up.
Well,
you forget stuff,
There's a couple of things that we would see over and over, and my daughter made a big deal about this. My daughter said, I can tell when she's lying because she stops and backs up and corrects it. It's like you can hear her catch herself and say, oh, this isn't the right story, and she backs up and she starts the story again. And then there are other things where she says the exact same sentence word for word in this letter, or even a paragraph in this letter she did in 1987 to what she says in 2007. 20 years later. I mean, that's not possible. That's rehearsed. And so I don't trust that. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying.
No, it does. It does.
But we just had to kind of figure it out. And there's also history, to mix with all that to just try to figure out, what exactly they were really doing. And there were all kinds of things, for example, in the photo albums that weren't anywhere in any of these stories, and all kinds of things that we remember that happened that she never talked, and many things that she talked about that we never knew had happened growing up, So it was quite the job putting together a timeline to try to figure out what really happened. And really, that's a lot of what the book is about. It centers on my daughter going through all these resources and trying to put together a timeline where we can actually figure out what most likely was really going on.
That's interesting. And some of the comments on Amazon, the book is called Misguided Patriots. They describe that it's a different narrative tone, used several different narrative tones. Is that because your daughter wrote some and you wrote some?
No, they're just talking about, I think, when the book is kind of a thriller and a love story and historical fiction kind of all mixed together. And there are a lot of exciting places in the book where there's big action that happens. And I just changed my, from past tense to present tense during the exciting parts that were happening because I thought it sounded better. And I guess you're not supposed to do that. I think that's what they're talking about.
Listen, I've read a lot of Amazon reviews. Trust me, yours are good, man. Okay, because most people have the most minutiae complaints to make about the book they just read. Now, what about this discrepancies between the letter and the rehearsal and what was her motivation for this letter and for this recording? Was she trying to?
Good question.
Yeah, was she sending a record?
I think she was leaving breadcrumbs for us to explore, you know. And as more and more information comes out, it becomes easier and easier, you know, to find out, you know, what was actually going on during these times. And I'd probably be best to give some examples of like the top things in these recordings, like in the tapes and stuff, she says that we moved to Austin and had a house constructed. You know, we went. She describes coming to Austin and looking and finding a neighborhood and picking out a lot and having a house built on that lot. But she has herself staying in a motel for 3 days before she moves in. So it's like, okay, well, which is it? Did you have the house built from scratch, or was it already built? And then, of course, we take that question and we start digging into that and go look at all the tax records and stuff, and we can't find any record that they ever owned that house.
Really?
And some corporation owned it ever since it was built in 1958. And so, you know, we just assumed somebody gave them that house.
What was the corporation? Were they listed as officers of the corporation? What was the corporation?
No, I don't recall it off the top of my head, but you know, they kept possession of the house until I want to say the 80s, the late 70s or 80s, which my mom had moved out of that house shortly after my father died, in the you know, middle 60s. She had moved out of the house, and you know, she had advertisements, you know, in her box of things after she died. You know, we found the newspaper ads for selling the house with like 80s prices on it. And so I don't know what she was doing. I don't know if maybe the agency owned the house. And
well, John, like if I could form a corporation right now and buy a house, you know, especially if I had money from sources, you know, maybe I don't want people to know about.
Yeah, but nobody did that. You're talking about 1958. Nobody was doing that.
Maybe you're right. You know? Yeah, maybe you're right. But then again, they come out of D.C. They would be familiar with Delaware corporations at the time. They would know how to do, you know, what they would call shelf corporations. They would know how to do that if they came out of intelligence. But anyway, that's a debate for another day.
Well, she didn't do the next house like that. The house after my father died, actually, she did have her name. I can't explain it. I don't know. Yeah. But like I said, just odd things like that where things didn't match. Also, a lot to do with my father. You know, where she like growing up. You know, she told me that whole story about him being in the band and writing the base newspaper. But when she made the recordings in 2007. She says in those recordings that he worked at ARDC, he worked at Cape Canaveral, he trained in Denver, he trained in San Antonio, and she goes in deep detail about every single thing that he did that completely contradicts everything she told me growing up.
But these recordings were designed for you and your sister. They were. This is what we're leaving to you, not to the world, for you.
You know, what really happened is, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Mormon faith, but you know, they're real into posterity and relatives and all this stuff. And it was really my sister's husband was a Mormon bishop, and it was really something I think that he pushed her into doing. And you got the distinct impression as you listen to these recordings that she was trying to find stuff to say. In a lot of cases, it seemed like, you know, she would jump around, and it would seem like she just ran out of things that she could say for that time frame. It's like it just seemed real clear when you listened to it that she didn't have anything to talk about. so she'd all of a sudden start talking about a boyfriend she had when she was 14.
Gotcha. Now what about, now you say that there were some gaps and you went by your sister's memory and your memory and things like that, but what about contemporaneous friends and relatives and coworkers and neighbors even from their life at that time? Were you able to reach out, locate any of those people and talk to them?
Yes.
Oh, great. What'd you find out? That's good stuff. What'd you find out?
Well, and some of this I actually found out after I finished the book, and I'm still looking into. But interestingly, during some of these tapes, my mother talks about how she went with our neighbor that lived 3 houses down. That was her best friend in Austin that had moved in right at the same time that we moved in. And she had taken my mom to Bergstrom Air Force Base and had her have coffee with Lady Bird Johnson and Nellie Conley. That summer of '63, before the assassination, they all sat and had coffee together at Bergstrom Air Force Base.
Yeah, and your mom also too talks about meeting with Alan Dulles every Christmas. He would come and see her.
Yeah, she obviously knew Dulles well.
Yeah, so she
and
was
we also had other.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also, and her direct boss was a guy named Ace Rosner, and you can look Ace Rosner up on the internet, and he's a well-known CIA guy, and her entire career, that was her guy she reported to, Ace Rosner, and he's a big Anzio War hero, and one-armed guy. He's a pretty colorful guy. You can look him up. And he had been to our house. He came and visited us in Austin, even after we moved, which is another way that I am certain that she didn't, leave the agency. But when I go back and I look into who these neighbors of ours were, I find out that, the husband is a Air Force colonel, which I actually knew growing up because they were friends of ours. Yeah. Her husband was an Air Force colonel, but when I read her, this lady that took my mom to the Air Force Base, when I would read her obituary, I find out that she was a nurse at the same hospital my mom was at Jefferson when she was working for the Cardiza Foundation. And then she moves at the exact same time as we do and lives 3 houses down.
Wow. And then, real quick, when you're talking to all these people, did any of them say to you, "Hey, John, we can't talk about that"? What are you talking about, John? Stay out of this.
Yeah, no. Well, the church did, because we had a lot of connections to the Catholic Church, and that is what the church told me. They said, "Go to the diocese or whatever. We won't tell you. We won't talk to you about anything." But most of the individuals I talked to either told me they didn't care, they weren't interested. They didn't believe in conspiracy theory stuff, and I could do whatever I want, use their name. Because I did courtesy calls and said, "Hey, I'm putting your name in my book." Right. And they would, say they didn't want anything to do with it. And some would just go, "Oh, my God, that makes everything make sense. I finally understand, and I'm so excited," and we end up talking for hours about it.
What about after the book came out? Has any of them come back to you and verified things, or has said, "Hey, give a heads up, you got this wrong," anything like that?
No, I found some things that I got wrong.
Well, so do I every day, yeah.
Yeah, but no, but I am communicating with a lot of people, and there's a, I guess just making sure I don't ramble too much, So running up to when we get to Austin in the run up to my father's death, which happened in January of 1964. In that run up, he's a professor at the University of Texas, and my mother goes to great lengths on these audio tapes to explain that he is 1/3 counseling and testing center paid, 1/3 paid to be a professor, and 1/3 paid to be doing experimental psychology. And when I go back and I study this family that moved down the street, the wife, as I said, I found out had been at the same hospital, worked at the same hospital as my mother did at the same time, which my mother, of course, never told me. and I'm sure they knew each other back then. That can't be a coincidence. And then her husband actually ended up being an executive with the Hogg Foundation, who paid for the experimental psychology work that my father did at the University of Texas. And so there's all kinds of linkage through this neighbor. You were asking about neighbors. And then also I had godparents that I didn't really know who they were. My mom just gave me their names and said, you know, your godparents were Gene Doak and Charles Doak. And I never had any contact with them that I remembered or anything else. Well, I come to find out when I researched that Gene Doak was actually my mother's CIA roommate when she was in the CIA, another CIA officer. And they also moved to Texas at the same exact time my parents moved to Texas, but they moved out to Lubbock. And so there's a whole group of people that then moved in 1958.
Yeah, it seems like an operation that they all worked together, yeah.
Yeah, and then everything, once they got there, it all became centered around this Catholic church. And my mother developed a real close relationship with the pastor of that church. All of us kids went to that church. All of our friends were from that church. They were all, when I go back and look at them as I was researching the book, they're all Air Force. And when I say they're all Air Force, I mean they're all Air Force, OSS, former Army intelligence. I mean, they're all connected military people. They're parents of all my friends at this little Catholic church, and the pastor of the church is a former air traffic controller that worked North Africa during the war, and then ended up a bunch of years at the Pentagon before becoming suddenly our pastor.
And seminary school for this guy?
Yeah, he went to seminary. Well, and he went to seminary school. When you go and look at there's actual records of his. I forget what the term is. When they made him a priest.
Yeah.
But the ceremony actually happened in Rome, which is kind of unusual. Usually that happens in the States, but they actually did it in Rome, and there were 5 guys with him, and 4 of those were named. Yeah, the ordination. And 4 of those were named, and one was, then another one was named as an unnamed Washington native, where they didn't give his name. And of course this pastor. And then when you track those other guys that left, you know, that were ordained at the same time, they became bishops, even archbishops. You know.
Wow. Hey, wait a second, man. Are you
familiar with important places?
Are you familiar with that whole story about that group of bishops? David Ferry was one of them, and Peter Lavenda talks about these bishops of this weird Catholic sect that were involved in the JFK assassination.
No, I have not seen that, but I have. You know, I'll look it up.
Yeah, this has got to be a huge. If this is a connection, this is a huge connection.
Oh, this is a connection. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that there's a connection. You know, what exactly the connection is, I don't know.
Yeah,
I have my theories, but so there's a lot of time that gets spent with these Catholic guys, and also at the church. Another member of the church is a guy named Dan Love, and Dan Love is like LBJ owned all the media in Austin, so he owned the radio station, the TV station. If you wanted to get any information, it came from LBJ, and his hand-picked chief of the news at the TV station was Dan Love, and Dan Love was in our parish, and he used to hang around our house all the time, just like that preacher did. So there was that preacher and Dan Love and my mom all hanging around the house together, way too much too. But so my dad goes to university in 58. He takes that job doing multiple different things there. He's actually working with a bunch of guys, and he did his dissertation on this early date, gifted and talented stuff, this talent identification program that they put together. And he actually was integral in designing that in his thesis with a guy named Thomas Magoon at the University of Maryland. And then one of Magoon's friends was actually running the testing and counseling center at the University of Texas. And my father went down and continued that there. And most people think of a counseling center to do with the way you would think of it today, like everybody's got some kind of mental problem and they're getting Xanax. But that's not what the counseling center was back then. It was they would test you, and then they would tell you, hey, you're good at this, so you need to go do this.
Oh, wow.
You know, so like you'd make a great test pilot, you need to go be a test pilot. Or you want to be an artist? No, you'll never make it as an artist. You need to be a researcher in rocket science, you know. And that
was a government funded, who was funding?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. I think a 1955 act, the Defense Education Act, that was funding it, and they state in the act, they state that this is a result of Sputnik and the Russians being ahead of us, and we have to identify talent. And that's what these guys were working on.
Wow, yeah, that's news to me too. I've never heard of that either, man. This is great stuff. You can look it up. We gotta have you come back a few times, bro. This is really good stuff. You know, one of the things, because we're starting to run out of time, one of the things you wanted to talk about was the JFK assassination.
Yeah, well, so one of these, you asked about, did I talk to anybody afterwards, you know, there was a guy that was from my school. His name's Paul Ramsey, and his father was the sports information director at the University of Texas in Austin, and good friends with Coach Joe Oil. And when I talked to my friend about the book was already finished, and I had already sent it to be published, you know, or edited. And he told me that he had been told a story by his father that Darrell Royal, who was best friends with LBJ in his later years, that LBJ told Darrell Royal near LBJ's death that he had been summoned to Fort Clark, Texas. You probably don't know where that is, but you can find out. He had been summoned to Fort Clark, where whoever they is, informed him that they were going to kill Kennedy. This was in the summer of '63, I think, in the fall, actually, after school had started. So like September of '63, right before the assassination, they had summoned him out to Fort Clark, and he was told that he was either going to go along with it or he was going to meet the same fate as JFK. That's the story this friend of mine told me when I told him about the book. And he said he had never told anybody else about it, and I had never heard that story before. And so I went back. It rang a bell with me, and we went back and looked through my parents' photo albums, and lo and behold, but in September of 1963, my parents were in Fort Clark, Texas. And I have photos of that and little notes next to it that says, you know, went to vacation without the kids at Fort Clark. And we were toddlers, you know, we were little. I was like 5. And this friend of mine didn't know that. So there's some apparent connection there. And then immediately after, if we still have time, immediately after the assassination, my mother tells a story on her tapes that, are we still there?
Yeah, we do. We have time. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So on the tapes, my mother is detailing the week of the assassination. And, you know, JFK was supposed to come to Austin after Dallas and didn't do it. But she explains that we're all gathered around the television watching the funeral that weekend, and the funeral procession on TV like everybody else was, and the phone rings. And when the phone rings, it's my dad's boss, the head of the Department of Psychology at the University of Texas, inviting him to a party that night with administration officials from Washington. That's what she says on the tape. And that my father blows up, gets all pissed off, tells them that he's not going. It's inappropriate. They can't have a party that night, let alone, you know, with all the Washington. And he refuses to go. And then shortly after that, he quits his job at the University of Texas. And shortly after that, he dies in a one-car accident on the freeway north of Austin.
Whoa. That's like a little trail of breadcrumbs there, man. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did they ever talk about it? You know, what was the mood around the house? They were upset that Kennedy got shot, but I guess they weren't in on the planning.
I don't know what they were doing. I know they were at Fort Clark. I know I heard that story. You know, when I have pictures of them, Clark, that you can find those pictures actually online, but it's very interesting because there's nobody else there. It's like my parents, their car, and not another soul in any of the photos,
Really?
which is really interesting to me. But, the timing and the fact that right before that, my mom was hanging out with LBJ's wife and the governor's wife, and my father actually gave a speech with LBJ that same summer on space at the University of Texas. I have a newspaper article that's also online that details out that my father actually spoke with LBJ at the University of Texas that summer, talking about space and the future of space. And so they're all connected to all these guys. This all looks pretty suspicious to me, although I don't have any proof.
But your mom was friends with Lady Bird. She met her with her in person at least once, right?
Right.
And your dad was friends with LBJ and met with him at least once.
Right.
Right. And just to clarify,
they both,
go ahead, yeah.
And then they both end up out at Fort Clark when rumor has it LBJ was out at Fort Clark, which I can't really verify, but he did leave Washington that weekend. So, supposedly for his ranch, but he could have been there.
I want to back up a little bit. You mentioned that they summoned him to this meeting. Who was that fellow you're talking about, and what was his background again? A friend of yours?
A friend of mine named Paul Ramsey. His father, that I went to school with at that Catholic church I'm telling you about.
Yeah.
And he's a musician from Austin, and I haven't kept close contact with him, but we have stayed in contact. He's been a lifelong friend, even at a distance, And I had never talked to him about any of this stuff before. And the only reason I called him, I had finished the book and it was being edited, and I was going to launch it at South by Southwest Music Festival in Austin because it takes place in Austin. And I was calling him to help me find some musicians that would be willing to promote the book while they're playing music, which is crazy as that may sound.
Yeah.
That's why I'm telling him. So I had to tell him the story to be able to enlist his help. And that's when he responded to me with this crazy story that I'd never heard before. And like I said, his father, I can't remember his first name off the top of my head, but his father, Ramsey, was the sports information director at the University of Texas, and Coach Darrell Royal, who was the coach during those championship years, and in fact was supposed to meet JFK at the airport and present him with a football when JFK came to Austin, which he didn't do. He actually was best friends with LBJ and spent a ton of time with him at his ranch in LBJ's later years, and that's all documented. And he told Paul's father, who told Paul right before he died, this story.
Now, this single car accident that took your father's life, what was your mother? This must have been a huge traumatic incident for you, so either you remember every little detail or you've blocked it out. Now, what was your mother's reaction to this? Was she angry, bitter, or just devastated? What was her reaction to it?
I was too young. I was only 5. It appeared to be quite calm. She does go through it in detail on audio tapes.
Okay.
And I would just simply say that it's chilling to listen to. There's a lot of laughter that seems very inappropriate as she's describing it. You know how some people, when they get in an uncomfortable situation, they kind of do a nervous laugh that they really don't have control of. So she's doing that as she's telling the story of what happened. He didn't die right away. He actually lived in critical condition for quite a few days, and she's describing all that with quite a bit of laughter mixed in. And it's pretty chilling. Chilling.
I have guessed.
And it's also there are also really unbelievable descriptions of the accident. She told me growing up that he fell asleep at the wheel and went off the road and crashed his car. In this recording that she made, she said that a friend of hers happened to be driving by and saw the accident happen, and he could tell that this common problem with 55 Fords of the steering shaft separating from the steering box had happened, and that he had lost control, which to me was, and the car was completely totaled and caught fire. So, I mean, that when you listen to that whole explanation on these tapes, it's like, what the hell is this? You know, it doesn't match anything I was told before. And it actually sounds quite unbelievable that she could know that level of detail of what happened, and that a friend of hers would happen to have been driving by and see it.
Yeah, single car accidents, deaths are always suspicious. Now, was your father a user of alcohol or drugs or anything like that? Do you know?
No.
Okay.
No.
Now, the thing about the laughing, too, now, I'll have guests on the show, and we'll be talking about something that the government got away with, and some horrific stuff, we'll be talking about, but we'll be laughing. Like, oh, how can you believe it? And was it kind of like, was she laughing like, oh, this is the story. This is what they say. How was the laughing? Can you describe it? We can hear it ourselves. We go to TikTok at Misguided Patriots, but how, for this interview, describe it.
I would just call it very nervous laughter, inappropriate, nervous laughter.
Gotcha. Jenna Gonyea, we're out of time. This time we're really out of time. But what would you like to leave us with in the next minute or two?
Just probably that I'm still discovering stuff about my parents, and I do have all those social media accounts, and I'm promoting the book on the social media accounts. But really, what I'm getting most out of having them is input from people about interesting leads to follow about my parents. And just having people follow me there and tell me their stories is unbelievably helpful.
The book is called Misguided Truths. No, Misguided Patriots. Misguidedpatriots.com. Misguided Patriots. And it's on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Misguided Patriots is the book. And our guest is Jenna Gonyea. I talked to him off the air, I talked to him on the air. This guy's got the ring of truth and no ulterior motives, in my opinion. And this is all new information that seems like he's just barely scratched the surface on. This is if these JFK guys can get off their asses and really talk to this guy and get in here and examine those pictures the way they do, examine every little thing. They're looking for stuff to examine, spend their lives examining. This seems like a lot of good material.
Examining documents,
Yeah, I know. This guy they're looking at the same stuff over and over again, debating it, and there's some new stuff. We got these recordings. Let's listen to them, No one's talking about this. So let's get to work on this, bro. Jenna Gonyea, and once again, the book is MisguidedPatriots.com. John, thank you so much, man.
Hey, it was really great to meet you, and thank you so much for having me on.
No, thank you. This is great stuff, man. Thank you. We'll be in touch, okay? Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.